For more on trade, tariffs, and economics, I'm joined by Jacob Kirkegaard. He's a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics here in Washington, D.C. Jacob, welcome to join us. I want to begin by the Canadian tariffs on U.S. goods. $13 billion is the worth that Canada is set to impose on American goods, taking effect today. Which side stands to lose more?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that the most exposed country is Canada, for the simple reason that the United States is 10 times as big. So even if you do tit for tat, the effect that it will have on the United States will be, roughly 1/10. So Canada has most to lose. But on the other hand, and you could argue that Canada is allied with the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is also going to be imposing retaliatory tariffs against the United States and the Trump administration. So the real question is if the combined effect of the retaliation that we will see will have a bigger effect on the United States than in Canada. So it's a little hard to say, but I think it's also worth mentioning there's a lot of people in the United States that support Canada. That needs to be factored in as well.
Sure, it's hard to put things in perspective on aggregate levels at this point, but which sectors and who at this point, by your estimate, stand to lose more?
Well, look, there are individual sectors that are, if you look at it, the steel and aluminum sector will clearly lose because they're the main component of both countries' tariffs, but there are also specifically targeted ones. If you're an exporter of maple syrup to Canada, for instance, yeah, you're going to lose. And the Canadians have been smart. If you want to retaliate against a country in trade, you target politically vulnerable locations. This is an election year, so they've clearly done that. And then you target sectors or products where you can easily buy a product from somewhere else, so that the U.S. producers or exporters to the Canadian markets will lose market share in Canada and therefore put pressure on the U.S. government, hopefully. So, that's the basic logic. But as I said, again, the most exposed country here is clearly Canada.
Well, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, we saw that China pledges to lower its tariffs for imported cars, a call from the Chinese consumers for the past decade. How do you look at that gesture and that policy?
I think that's a positive gesture. I think China China is now the largest auto market in the world. That basically to me means that China really doesn't need a high auto tariff, for the simple reason that any producer that wants to sell a lot of cars in China will produce them there. In the same way as most producers that sell in the US market from other countries produce their cars here. It'll be the same in China. So China doesn't need that right now. And of course, politically, it's a very strong signal to send. While Donald Trump is about, in a few months probably, to levy so-called protective tariffs on US car imports for national security grounds, China says, wait a minute, we don't even need these tariffs anymore. So there's also politics involved. But economically, China doesn't need high auto import tariffs.
And finally, help us understand the mentality of the Trump administration. People used to say that he's using this as negotiation tactics, but it looks like he's been more serious than just playing a game.
Yeah, I think, there are basically two ways to interpret this, in my opinion. Either it's purely politics. He thinks he can gain political points in some swing states in the Midwest by doing this. I don't think that will work, but that's a political call. Or, which I think I'm more afraid of, is actually that if you look at the broad spectrum of things that the administration has done, their intent is essentially to pull the United States out of the global economy. They want to make it difficult for American firms to invest abroad, and they want to force every company that sells in the U.S. market to produce in the U.S. market. That is a recipe for lower welfare, lesser economic growth, less jobs in the United States. But it seems to be the economic nationalism that Trump has said he would implement. But it would be a disaster.
Economic nationalism. We'll see how that plays out. Thank you, Jacobs. Thank you for your time.